We cannot and will not take the risk of a child undergoing medical, hormonal, or surgical interventions that could permanently limit or eliminate the choices they may want to make as an adult.
So Danielle Smith posted this. New Zealand has now stopped the use of puberty blockers on minors, acknowledging the lack of credible evidence and the growing concerns over long-term harm. They've joined Alberta, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and the United States in taking these kinds of important steps to protect children. This is the right direction, and Alberta applauds their decision. So the dominoes are starting to fall. Now, Danielle Smith is the premier of Alberta. I think she's far and away the best premier in Canada. We need more like her. I think at some point she'd be an excellent leader of the federal Conservative Party. Although, by that time Alberta might be its own. By that time, Alberta might be its own country. But in any case, she's doing a great job right now. And Danielle Smith passed legislation in Alberta to stop so-called medical professionals from doing gender experiments on children. And that's what they are. They euphemistically call it gender-affirming care. And as with everything from the left, it means the opposite of what it actually is. It's actually the real conversion therapy, because you're trying to turn a child into a rough facsimile of something they can never actually be. But let's take a look at this from Danielle Smith again. In late 2024, Alberta's government passed legislation to preserve the choices of children and youth, improve access to health services, and protect children, families, and parental involvement in the education system. Since passing the legislation, 3 lawsuits have been filed by activist organizations, with one injunction already in place. So Canada is full. Our judicial system in Canada is full of woke activists, unfortunately. Alberta's government has been clear all along. We are prepared to use every legal and constitutional tool available to protect the health and well-being of children. If passed, Bill 9, the Protecting Alberta's Children Statutes Amendment Act, will invoke the Notwithstanding Clause 2. So the Notwithstanding Clause is a way to just get around activist judges, essentially. And it's a part of the Canadian Constitution, so it's 100% constitutional. Preserve the future choices of children and youth. So, not sterilizing them, for instance. Strengthen the role of parents as a child's primary caregiver. Ensure fairness and safety in amateur competitive sports. So, no men and women's sports, right? Strengthen the role of parents as a child's primary caregiver. That means the school can't secretly trans your kids. Let's take a look here. And she is willing to use the Notwithstanding Clause, and good for her. This is going to be remembered. The so-called gender-affirming care is going to be remembered as something unbelievably barbaric and insane. Just frankly, insane. People will look back on it as that, because it is. And we're going to get into the claims of evidence, by the way. But let's take
Today, our government is introducing Bill 9. Bill 9 will invoke the Canadian Charter's Notwithstanding Clause to amend and uphold 3 critical pieces of legislation without further court delay or uncertainty. We have a responsibility to provide clarity, a responsibility to protect all children and youth, and a responsibility to give parents, not institutions or courts, the primary role in life-changing decisions about their children. This government does not turn to the Notwithstanding Clause unless the stakes warrant it. And in this case, the stakes could not be higher. This legislation is not about denying care. We cannot and will not take the risk of a child undergoing medical, hormonal, or surgical interventions that could permanently limit or eliminate the choices they may want to make as an adult. We want every young Albertan to receive the mental health supports, the compassion, and the guidance that they need at home, at school, and in their communities. Before I wrap up, I do want to speak directly to young Albertans who are navigating what their identity means through the already difficult process of growing up. You deserve dignity, understanding, and support. You belong in Alberta. We firmly believe that. We also believe it's our duty to protect protect you. This legislation is about your future. So when the time comes, you have every opportunity to make the adult decisions that are rightfully yours and yours alone.
Yeah, we need more people like this with this kind of courage who just can just speak the plain truth, even if the media is attacking her relentlessly over this with all of their fake science. And we're going to get into that. But she's being attacked relentlessly. And we need more people that are willing to just stand up to it. More people who just recognize that a society that is willing to fall so low as to conduct what are effectively just medical experiments on children for the sake of ideology, because somebody redefined a word into an infinite series of abstractions. A country that is willing to do that has demonstrated that it has no decency and no sanity, and it will fall. So we need more people like Danielle Smith, more people that are willing to just face down the kind of relentless media attacks and the relentless activist attacks and the constant lies that come from both. To back up what I'm saying, let's go to CTV News. So here's what Danielle Smith was talking about. Hold on. New Zealand halts new puberty blockers for young transgender people. So if they're already on them, they can keep taking them, but they're not going to put any more children on them. New Zealand said on Wednesday it was banning new prescriptions of puberty blocking drugs for young transgender people. See, this is the constant framing and just the inherent bias in modern journalism in Canada. Young transgender people, the whole point of this is that you don't know that, right? They're going on the assumption, they are implying here that such a thing actually exists. In a move that critics warned could worsen the mental health of those affected. So right off the bat, we have the negative framing. Well, who are the critics, by the way? Critics warned could worsen the mental health of those affected. The decision resulted from a health ministry finding of a lack of high-quality evidence that demonstrates the benefits or risks, Brown added in a statement. Lack of high-quality evidence. We're going to get into that. Okay, so who else has said that there is a lack of high quality evidence? Well, let's see. So you have Denmark. By the way, it's all the wokest countries, right, have taken a step back from this stuff and changed their policies around this once they've looked at their own data and realized that, oh, wait a second, this actually isn't backed up by science at all. In fact, science tends to say the opposite. Denmark joins the list of countries that have sharply restricted youth gender transitions. Why is that? Let's see. The rationale for this shift was explained in a recent publication in the Journal of Danish Medical Association. The authors can hardly be accused of being armchair critics. They are the very clinicians responsible for assessing youth and approving them for gender transitions in Denmark. Realizing that their well-meaning intentions were based on insufficient evidence and seeing the growing evidence of harm, they sharply reversed course. Today, only 6% of the referrals are approved for hormonal transition, and no minors are allowed to transition surgically. Sweden, like that's progressive heaven. That's progressive Shangri-La, Sweden. Sweden puts brakes on treatments for trans minors. Sweden, the uncertain state of knowledge calls for caution. Board Department head Thomas Linden said in a statement in December, the uncertain state of knowledge. This is Sweden, okay? It had to be pretty bad if even Sweden went, hold on, this is not good. Let's see. Here's from the UK government, Gov UK. Ban on puberty blockers to be made indefinite on experts' advice. This is from 2024. Puberty blockers for the treatment of gender incongruence and or gender dysphoria in under 18s were banned temporarily in May 2024 after the CAS review found there was insufficient evidence to show they were safe. They've since been made permanently. CAS review found there was insufficient evidence to show they were safe. Now, it's careful language because what it actually showed is that it's worse than not safe. It's actively causing harm. Here's from U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services today published Treatment for Pediatric Gender Dysphoria, Review of Evidence and Best Practices. Its peer-reviewed study of the medical dangers posed to children from attempts to change their biological sex, which obviously you can't do. That's impossible. The report, released through the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, finds that the harms from self-rejecting procedures, including puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgical operations, are significant, long-term, and too often ignored or inadequately tracked. What we're getting at here is it's not real science. This stuff isn't actually backed up by science as the activists claim that it is. The American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics peddled the lie that chemical and surgical sex-rejecting procedures could be good for children. I mean, it's so obviously insane, right? Like, it's just, you don't need to be an expert. There are some things that are just on their face so absurd that you don't need to be an expert. Just any person on the street could tell you better than the American Medical Association or the American Academy of Pediatrics or the Endocrine Society, whatever. Anyway, this is according to Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They betrayed their oath to do no harm, and their so-called gender-affirming care has inflicted lasting physical and psychological damage on vulnerable young people. This is not medicine, it's malpractice. And there's a reason you never see detransitioners like Chloe Cole on ABC News or CNN or MSNBC. And, you know, the New York Times isn't going to send out a reporter to interview them and tell their story. There's a reason for that, because they can describe the ugly truth of it. Back to the original tweet here from Danielle Smith. New Zealand has now stopped the use of puberty blockers on minors, acknowledging the lack of credible evidence and the growing concerns over long-term harm. So what you have is something that is just purely ideological. And you can criticize Danielle Smith, say she's an ideologue. Are you going to criticize Sweden? Are you going to say Sweden is far right now? Right? Are you going to criticize Denmark? Are you going to say they're far right now? It's just reality. Again, in 10 years, I think there'll be very few people who will admit to having actually supported this total lunacy. I mean, it's barbarism, right? This is Mengele level stuff. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. Please like, share, and subscribe. Subscribing really helps me out. I thank you for that. I will see you next time.